So that leads to what does that mean for businesses and individuals? We sort of know, we've got a few clues, because actually we did watch that price spike in 2008, 2009. And what happened there was about a quarter of the shoe industry in some parts of China closed down in a period of a few months, because actually the margins they were operating on were so thin that they couldn't afford the transport costs anymore. We saw some American steel plants reopening, because actually the cost of it was cheaper to make steel locally than ship ore from Australia to China and then steel from China to the United States. And there's quite a lot of thinking which says that
so the vulnerabilities in long supply lines
start being really open. Yeah, absolutely. And there's quite a lot of literature and jargon in the business literature at the moment which talks about we've been through a period of offshoring driven by cheap oil really, and that we're now likely to move to probably not onshoring necessarily, though that might happen too, but to what's called nearshoring, where you basically find a low-cost market near you where the transport costs are not excessive, and you put those, you reorganise your supply chain around that. And we're also seeing things which are just about increasing resilience, so a bit more redundancy in your supply chains. But I think we're also going to see other things. Pretty much every large business has now put in place energy reduction programs, which it's a simple cost driver. But there's this.
How serious are those though?
I think they're quite serious. The issue about those programs is that there's two stages to them, and you can do the first part very easily, which is just get people to use less stuff, travel a bit less, and that will reduce its costs. So financial controllers love it. The second stage, where you maybe move to the closed loop production, which is probably the long wave version of how do you solve this problem of lack of resources.
What is closed loop production?
Closed loop production is where, I think there's a famous phrase by Bill McDonough about it, which is that anything that becomes a byproduct of your industrial system either becomes a raw material for somebody else, or goes back to or for you, or goes back into the earth as a clean nutrient.
So it's recycling.
It's more than recycling. It's a complete networked production system
where everything is used.
Where everything gets used, exactly right. Yeah. Now at that point, and that's quite a complex thing to arrange there, because it suddenly means that you're having to have relationships with companies that can use your byproducts as raw materials. And actually, in the world we're in at the moment, you probably don't even know who those people are. So suddenly the second order change, which is a whole different way of thinking about the industrial system, which manages not just energy scarcity but material scarcity and food scarcity and whole water
but presumably
scarcity.
all those products that are made out of petroleum become like the transport, they become
more expensive. Yes, and that's so anyway, that's the long way going. Yeah. There's you've just mentioned products which are made out of petroleum. One of the knock-ons of expensive oil is expensive fertilizer, and one of the knock-ons of expensive fertilizer is expensive food. So equally, oil is fantastically useful for a lot of things. Aspirin, for example, a lot of medicines get made out of oil. There's one of the early peak guys, a guy called Kenneth Defis, said, we'll look back and wonder why we wasted all that oil driving to the shops when we should have been using it for medicine. So that's probably the other thing that's happening. It's going to take a long time for oil to vanish completely, but the oil that we have will end up starting using it on the high value things that's useful, rather than driving to the shops to get a newspaper on a Sunday morning.
And what impact will that have on flying?
I'm a long-term pessimist on flying, but every time I speak to aviation people, they assure me that the gains that aviation is making in terms of its fuel efficiency have been really striking, that there's a whole lot of operational gains they can make, things like evening the flight path up, the takeoff path. If you have a more shallow takeoff path, you can actually make significant fuel gains. That by the time they've got those in place, the materials are going to be much lighter. So, we'll have significantly less carbon emissions attached to flying. I'm slightly sceptical because, you need that liquid burn to get that weight into the air. So I suspect that we'll be seeing a lot less flying over 20 years' time than we're doing now. That said, the architect Bill Dunster, who obviously is an environmental pioneer in terms of buildings, has been working on a proof of concept airship which uses helium to go up and down. It only flies at about 300 kilometres an hour, but that's enough to get quite a long way, and uses almost no fuel at all. It's largely solar powered. So, I think you'll start seeing alternatives pop in. They just won't be flying as we know it.
Mm. And do you think the level of innovation within energy and within industry around energy is happening fast enough?
I think we use a model sometimes. It's quite a complicated model, but I'll have a go at it, which is called the Three Horizons model, where the first horizon is the kind of the dominant companies in an industry and their mental models, their business models, and the third horizon are the signs of future possibilities. And I think in some ways what's happening in the energy sector is that the companies that dominate at the moment are not actually geared to make the sorts of energy that renewables tend to represent. They're very good at taking stuff out of the ground, sticking it into containers and shipping it to somewhere and decanting it into something else. And when you look at the way solar works, when you look at the way wind works, when you look at the way tidal barrages work, none of those work on those models. So one of the problems we've got is, and in the Three Horizons model, the first horizon and the third horizon end up in some sort of dance. But that's sometimes quite a destructive dance. Going back to cars again, General Motors' response to effectively at the time when it was a third horizon upstart was to effectively to kill off the tram systems and the light rail systems that used to be all over America. And there was lots of stories of large companies buying up patents of competitors. There's probably more stories than actually incidents of it, but it's one of the great business conspiracy memes. So at the moment, the people who actually have the money and the margins to do the investment don't have the business models and have largely pulled out of renewables. So that means that the renewable sector is coming from these small new businesses. A very classic innovation story there, but that all means it takes a lot longer to get to scale.
If you look at electric cars, both the range and the price, they're sort of twice the price of petrol cars. I mean, we are not going to see significant change on that basis.
And there's quite a lot of argument that says that actually the quickest way to reduce car use is through car sharing, car pooling, just getting people to use cars less. And as I said earlier in the discussion, when you've got a generation of young people for whom cars don't matter that much, that may be what happens. In fact, we may just end up with groups of young people who don't regard the car as that important, who already embedded in Skype and all of the other tools for hanging out. You don't need to necessarily get in the car and see your friends even to see your friends anymore. Even if you live in somewhere quite rural, you can just
keep in contact.
Hang out virtually and do something together.
So cars may decline? Are we that near?
There's already some. The data's a bit muddy actually because it's tied up with recession as well. But there's been a recurring idea that we might have seen peak cars in the West, obviously not in the emerging economies where they're still in fast growth, but in the Western developed markets, we may have passed the moment of peak cars.
Andy, thanks for talking to me today.